Hey everyone, we're going to be making Neapolitan-style pizza today using the book The Elements of Pizza by Ken Forkish and techniques from J. Kenji Lopez Alt. You'll need some basic tools and ingredients: flour, kosher salt, instant active dry yeast, a mixing bowl, a liquid measuring cup, measuring spoons, and the most important thing, a kitchen scale, because we want to weigh out those ingredients. Start measuring out about 350 grams of, hold on. The water has to be at a very specific temperature. So we've got our instant read probe thermometer here. As I was saying before, you want to start measuring out 350 grams or milliliters of 90 to 95 degree Fahrenheit warm water to activate the yeast without killing it. Pour that into a large bowl. And then to that, add about 15 grams of fine sea salt or kosher salt. After you've added in the salt, we're going to add in about a quarter teaspoon of yeast. If you do have a really precise kitchen scale, you can measure that out to about 0.3 grams, but a volumetric measure of 1/3 to 1/4 teaspoon works just fine. Let the yeast hydrate in the water for about a minute and then swish it around just to make sure it gets dissolved. It helps to check the temperature to make sure you get to a target temperature of about 80 degrees Fahrenheit for the finished dough. Add to that bowl about 500 grams of flour. To mix the dough, start off by kind of moving everything around in the bowl with your hand just to get it incorporated into a single mass. And then after that, you'll want to employ what Ken calls the pincer method, where you cut the dough into sections with your hands and fold it back together on itself into, again, a unified mass. Remember, the target temperature of the dough is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and we've got it. Bring the rest of the dough ball together into a single mass and then let that rest for about 20 minutes before we get to kneading. Cold brew. Alright, got its marker. Neapolitan pizza crossed off. After 20 minutes is up, prep your workstation for kneading. Lightly dust your work surface with flour. Gently scrape the dough out of the bowl onto your work surface. And knead that for about 30 seconds to a minute. The dough should become pretty smooth and elastic. If you do find that your dough is getting to be a little too tacky, just incorporate more of that dusting flour from the work surface. Form into a seam side down dough ball. Lightly oil a large mixing bowl or a dough tub. This is the container we're going to be using for the bulk fermentation, resting the dough seam side down here for about 2 hours. And cover tightly with plastic cling wrap. Once the 2-hour bulk fermentation is complete, we're going to take the dough out of that container and once again place it on a lightly floured surface to shape it and to prepare it for the longer 6-hour fermentation. Lightly flouring the dough in the bowl as well as your hands will help ease it out onto the work surface. And gently scrape the dough, a little more flour if needed, out onto the work surface, being as gentle as possible. There's no shame in using a plastic dough scraper to make this process a lot easier. Dust the entire top of the dough ball with more flour. And then using our kitchen scale nearby, we're going to weigh out initially the entire dough mass and use a little mental math or a calculator to make sure that we're getting as close to 3 equal pieces of dough as possible. Once you have your dough balls measured out into 3 equal portions, you're going to start shaping them. First, stretch 1/3 of the dough off to the side until it meets resistance, fold it back on itself, and then continue repeating, working your way around the dough and forming it into a medium tight round. The goal here is to make very smooth, medium tight dough rounds that have no tears, and really only one small burrata-like seam on the bottom, so that your dough balls otherwise appear seamless. Once you have all 3 dough balls formed, place them on a lightly floured baking sheet. You want to put a little space between them so that they can expand, but a little touching later on, after they've risen a bit, is okay. You want to also lightly flour the tops of them because we're going to cover it with plastic wrap and you don't want it to stick and inhibit any of their expansion. And look, dough balls! Reuse the plastic wrap from before because, sustainability, and cover the dough balls in preparation for their second fermentation for the next 6 hours. After the second fermentation, it's time to make Neapolitan pizza. Since I don't have a brick oven at home, I'm going to be employing J. Kenji Lopez Alt's hacker-free Neapolitan pizza technique, which uses a cast iron griddle, floured as you can see here, and your ordinary stovetop and broiler to get similar results. Dust the skillet with flour, tap out the excess, and then place on the stove to heat over high heat until lightly smoking. This is also a good time to get your broiler heated to high. As the griddle heats up on the stove, remove the dough from the baking sheet and place on a lightly floured work surface. To start shaping the dough ball into a pizza round, use your fingertips to lightly press kind of a well into the center as you push air out towards the rim. This creates the future crust. From there, you can lift the entire dough round up using your fingertips to preserve that rim all the way around and let gravity pull the dough down and stretch it out. You can continue alternating punching the dough down and creating that rim with your fingertips, as well as stretching it out using gravity to pull the dough down, and both techniques will really help. As long as you're gentle, you're not going to tear any holes in the dough. When it's almost time to cook the pizza, have your toppings nearby. I'm using some basic tomato sauce, which is just crushed tomatoes and kosher salt, buffalo mozzarella, and a chiffonade of basil, which is just basil leaves rolled up and sliced into nice thin fancy ribbons. Once the griddle is heated, transfer your dough round onto it. You're going to notice it start to bubble and hiss a little bit. Spread about 2 tablespoons or around 1/8 of a cup of sauce evenly over the dough. I went a little overboard here and used about a 1/4 cup, which I do not recommend, as this pizza did end up a little too saucy. Drizzle about a tablespoon or so of really nice olive oil over the sauce. And then top evenly with buffalo mozzarella or other fresh mozzarella. And sprinkle some of the chiffonade of basil over the pizza now before broiling, and you can add a little more after for that fresh basil flavor. Transfer the skillet directly beneath the broiler and broil for anywhere between 1 and 4 minutes until nicely charred in spots. Once nicely charred and the cheese is bubbling, Remove from the broiler and place on the stove to finish cooking the underside. Transfer the pizza to a cutting board and top with fresh grated grana padano or parmigiano reggiano. Sprinkle more of the fresh basil over top. And then of course drizzle with a little more olive oil. Serve immediately and enjoy.